Here we are removing the batteries, which are two batteries, two 12-volt batteries from our engine. Basically, we're trying to show that we do not need the batteries once the engine is running. The engine will produce its own energy and can run without any input from any outside source.
Then take that one off, please. Can you get a good shot of this? Okay, I'll turn it this way. This is the bottom of it. And it's solid and sealed.
Then somewhere in this setup there has to be another source of power. And that's the question that's followed this engine for decades. Because one of the most famous physicists in the world once watched an earlier version and thought he'd figured out exactly where the trick was. His name was Richard Feynman. He went to one of Joseph Papp's demonstrations already convinced something wasn't right. Then he noticed an electrical connection. He thought he'd found the power source. But when it was disconnected, the machine kept going. What happened after that turned a weird engine demonstration into something much darker. The machine exploded. Several people were injured. One man later died. We'll get to exactly what happened. First, you need to see what Papp said he'd actually built.
Following the incident, Papp sued Feynman for destroying his engine, but since proving this accusation would have required Papp to reveal his engine's secrets, the case was settled out of court. Feynman concludes that Papp had engineered the explosion to prevent closer scrutiny of his engine and keep investor dollars flowing, but had underestimated the explosive charge.
So what exactly is this thing? Papp's basic claim was that the cylinders could be sealed with a tiny charge of gas inside them. Instead of constantly feeding the engine gasoline and dumping exhaust out the other side, that same charge was supposed to stay inside and keep doing the work, which sounds ridiculous, but this is where the old footage gets interesting.
Okay, we have a one-cylinder engine here behind us with a plexiglass and just one coil. Normally we have 3 coils, but we want to see the reaction, and that's the reason for the plexiglass. So we can see what is actually happening inside the cylinder every time it fires. We have a very small amount of inert gases, namely helium, neon, argon, krypton, and xenon, in here for several purposes. Some of the gases basically will transfer energy. Other gases will cool the cylinder. So the engine does not need a cooling system at all. No fuel goes in, everything is sealed, and our cooling system, the engine cools itself.
And they're not just pointing at a sealed box and asking people to trust them. They're opening it up, showing the chamber, showing the piston, showing where the gas supposedly goes. According to them, this tiny sealed volume is basically the fuel tank.
Is only the firing of one electron. Daggers of light would move towards the cylinder. As soon as it touched the cylinder, there would be a flash between frames, and then a plasma reaction would occur, which is, we're somewhat familiar with plasma reactions, and then the piston would be pushed down. And also another amazing thing is, it seems to be linear force rather than the usual three-dimensional force that we're familiar with, where it's just an explosive, a three-dimensional explosion. It appears to be force in one direction also.
So real quick, I want to show you my engine. And this is a 2-cylinder engine, 400 horsepower. And I move objects this way along on wheels, like a bus, a truck, a car, an airplane. With this is free energy, there's no input.
Listen to that wording. No input. That's a very different claim from saying an engine is just incredibly efficient. If there's literally no energy going in, then this thing shouldn't be possible. But there's a detail in his own explanation that's easy to miss. Keep listening.
And I use 24 volts, so that's the only input I have, 24 volts.
So now we've got batteries, an alternator, ignition coils, switches, and timing controls. That doesn't automatically mean there's a trick. A normal gasoline engine has electrical systems too. But now, no input isn't really the right question. The question is whether this machine produces more usable energy than everything that's being supplied to it. And that's a much harder thing to prove.
And these are the switches here for the various coils. And then I have resistors over here. These are variable resistors. Basically, I create somewhere around 1,000 volts with about 600 plus amperage. 600, maybe 1,000 amps. We could use to light up the house, but here I just have 2 batteries. And actually, the 2 batteries are just for the spark plug and to put 24 volts these coils will take 24 volts, and that's the only reason for the spark plugs. And the engine basically runs by itself in a vacuum in a void.
It's a two-cylinder engine, 400 horsepower, and we can produce approximately 350 kilowatt per hour by attaching a gearbox and a generator to it. This is a small engine. We can do 4, 6, 8-cylinder engines up to a megawatt if we want.
Before we give Papp too much credit, there's something you need to know about him. This wasn't his first impossible machine. Years earlier, he claimed he'd built a homemade submarine that could travel around 300 miles an hour. He also claimed he'd crossed the Atlantic in it.
In the evening of August the 11th, 1966, a man is found floating on a small rubber raft off the coast of Brest, France, dressed in a pilot's flight suit and a helmet. On being fished from the water, the man, dazed and nearly incoherent, identifies himself as Joseph Papp, a Hungarian inventor living in Canada. Asked if he was in a plane crash, he says no, he bailed out of a submarine.
And that's where the story started falling apart. The submarine was never found. The documentary this footage comes from says evidence placed Papp traveling to France by ordinary means instead, including a flight and train journey. So by the time he started promoting an engine that supposedly barely needed fuel, he already had a pretty serious credibility problem, which makes what happened next even stranger.
But this too contained a few details on the operating principle of the engine. Even more embarrassingly, photos in the book allegedly depicting the cockpit and engine of the submarine are clearly the interior of a household washer and dryer. Finally, in a 1968 interview with the London Daily Mirror, Papp admitted that the whole affair had been a stunt.
Because people still paid attention. Papp filed patents. Engineers came to see the experiments. Investors got interested. And he wasn't only showing a motor spinning on a stand. Before the full engine demonstration, there were tests meant to show just how much energy his gas mixture could release. One of them used what was basically a steel cannon surrounded by concrete. The test didn't go as planned. The projectile reportedly jammed, and the thing blew apart. But the reaction was violent enough that people wanted to see more. Eventually, Papp agreed to demonstrate the engine itself.
Nonetheless, Papp's experiments attracted considerable interest among engineers and investors, and in October 1968, he agreed to hold a public demonstration in the Mojave Desert using a makeshift cannon made from steel pipe embedded in a block of concrete to showcase the power of his special noble gas fuel mixture. Unfortunately, the projectile jammed halfway down the barrel, causing the cannon to blow itself apart. The observers were nonetheless impressed owing to the size of the explosion given such a small amount of gaseous fuel.
And sitting in the audience was Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize, Caltech. Not exactly the easiest guy to impress with talk about mystery energy. Feynman already thought Papp's explanation made no sense. He wasn't really there to be convinced. He was looking for the trick.
It's really quite remarkable. You don't have to buy fuel for the car. The fuel is injected into the cylinders when the engine is manufactured and lasts about 6 months. Then you have to bring it back to have it recharged. The engine is air-cooled and can make a car run 60 miles per hour on the freeway. I told them nothing has enough power to go for 6 months like that unless it's a nuclear reactor.
Then he saw something that looked obvious. Wires ran from the engine into measuring equipment, and that equipment was connected to an electrical outlet. To Feynman, there it was. The supposed miracle engine was plugged into the wall. But according to Feynman's own account, Papp pulled the plug himself, and the fan kept turning.
And there was a bit of disappointment. The propeller of the fan went around quietly, without the noise of an ordinary engine, with powerful explosions in the cylinders. Naturally, after seeing all this, Feynman set out to debunk what was clearly a classic perpetual motion scam. In an article written for Laser, the Journal of Southern Californian Skeptics, he described what happened next. Mr. Papp pulled the plug from the wall, and the fan propeller continued to turn.
Feynman's next thought was a hidden battery, so he asked if he could hold the disconnected plug. Papp let him. Feynman figured if he waited long enough, whatever was secretly powering the machine would eventually run down. It didn't. Instead, Papp started asking for the plug back. Eventually, Feynman handed it over. It was plugged back in, and a few moments later, the engine exploded. 3 men were injured. 1 later died. Papp blamed interference with the demonstration. Feynman remained convinced he'd been watching a fraud. You'd think that's where the story ends. It isn't.
Following the incident, Papp sued Feynman for destroying his engine, but since proving this accusation would have required Papp to reveal his engine's secrets, the case was settled out of court, Caltech paying Papp from a legal fund reserved for defending faculty. In his article for Laser, Feynman concludes that Papp had engineered the explosion to prevent closer scrutiny of his engine and keep investor dollars flowing, but had underestimated the explosive charge.
Because years later, people are still building and filming Papp-style engines. And this is the part I find more interesting than the theory. Forget free energy for a minute. Just watch what's actually on the tape. There's a real machine turning. They can change the speed. They're willing to take parts of it apart on camera. They physically carry the batteries away, and then they connect the engine to a dynamometer and start loading the shaft. None of that proves the big claim, but it does give us something we can actually examine.
The engine is made to run at about 400, 500 RPM. And then if we need more RPMs, we can put a gearbox on there and increase the RPM to whatever we want. We're running, instead of a dynamometer, we can run a generator. And here the RPMs are going to go real low. Here they are. Might be 50 RPM. Still the engine runs. Here, see how now we've got 519, 520.
We're talking about no fuel, we run nothing, we burn nothing, and we use nothing. This is the head of the piston. And then here we'll put Teflon rings.
And obviously, this is why they're opening it. If there's a hidden motor or some giant battery buried inside the engine, show us where it is. I don't see an obvious one here, but that still doesn't account for every connection outside the engine.
Now we shut it off, so we can show you we shut it off. Now we're showing the dynamometer readout, and we're at 123 RPM, 120 RPM, with 276 foot-pounds of torque being applied to the engine. The engine is running, as you can see, at 120 RPMs, real smooth, and we're going to put a very heavy load on it.
This is where the demonstration starts looking serious. They're showing torque under load, but a dynamometer only tells us what's happening at the output. We still need to know everything going on.
We have no cooling system in the engine. The engine does not require a cooling system. As I mentioned, it stays at about 140 when you're putting a load on it. So that's, you can touch it, it's not very hot. Well, we just want to do a test here. See how now we've got 519, 520 RPMs. There's your reserve foot-pounds of torque on the right, the other readout on the right, which means we can add another 400 foot-pounds of torque. So basically about 1,000 foot-pounds of torque is what this engine can withstand. And as I say, the lowest we would run it on a load is about 112. There it is, 113, 112 with 500 foot-pounds of torque. That's the best that we want to do.
And we'll take this one out, and we want you to see that there is nothing in this engine. Okay, this is the top part of the piston here.
And I like this footage because it shows something that polished demonstrations don't. This wasn't a machine they could apparently switch on and have work perfectly every time. They're experimenting. Things don't cooperate. They're trying different setups.
The piston itself, so that none of the gases can escape. This is stationary. This one will move up and down. You see, there's another portion that goes here, and the top plate we took off, it'll bolt on top, so that this will remain stationary, and this one will fire back and forth.
One successful looking run can be interesting, but if you're claiming you've discovered a new source of energy, somebody else has to be able to reproduce it under controlled conditions, over and over again. That's a completely different standard.
There's many other people that have done experiments and worked and raised money to try to figure out how this works. But they all fail to get a true power input-output test, which is the holy grail of everything. And until you've got that, you don't have anything.
And that's really the whole problem with Papp in one sentence.
Papp engine started that way, but as we look into the engine, there's a cylinder in a piston, and it goes up and down. There's tremendous forces up there. And there is no way the noble gases will stay in there. Maybe it would go up and down maybe 100 times maximum, and the gas will be gone. It's just natural leak. Natural leak out. If it in a balloon, a sealed balloon, it will leak out. It will permeate out. It will come out slowly. Same thing. And from that point of view, it's this thing is just not going to cut it.
Even people trying to recover the idea eventually started wondering if Papp's explanation itself was wrong. So they tried another approach. Forget the exotic gas mixture for a minute. Use ordinary air, create a plasma electrically, and see whether you can reproduce the same kind of violent piston movement. Whatever this proves, or doesn't prove, the next part is worth actually watching.
So hopefully in the future, we don't need gasoline in this because of this. Okay, 1, 2, Straight. Oops, excuse me. Oh, that thing flew straight, tore this thing apart.
What's the weight on? What's
About
the weight?
a little bit over a pound.
And notice something here. In this experiment, they're not pretending there's no conventional source of electricity. There's a regular 12-volt battery. There's an inverter. Electricity is going into the setup. That's completely fine if you're trying to study the effect. The only question that matters is whether you can accurately measure all of that input and then show that you're getting more usable energy back out.
The air is expanding and it pops that.
Whatever is in there, we don't tell the detail.
Here, Robbie, look.
But there's nothing in there.
Watch.
Let's take a look. How much energy is that spark?
Very little. We can adjust it. Less than 1,000 joules.
You're using a battery?
This is a 12-volt battery. Regular 12 volts you can buy from Radio Shack, anywhere. Little cheapy inverter, nothing fancy. And we're pushing this at atmospheric pressure. We don't pressurize it, we don't put any gas, it's just whatever air is in there. Okay, so from a 12-volt battery. Okay.
In the magic box.
So the 12 volts is applied to the magic box.
Right.
You're putting some electricity in. You're getting over unity.
I say yes, but I have not instrumentation that I can definitely show it.
And eventually, the Papp story takes the turn you probably knew was coming. The idea that somebody powerful didn't want this technology getting out.
Your videotape on how you move objects, and it was terrific, just amazing. The only problem with you, and the difference between you and me, you went and showed it to the government, and they took it away, and I'm not showing mine to the government anymore. I showed it once, but they didn't believe me.
Bill Tompkins was another interesting fellow. He worked at TRW and managed the Papp project. Eventually, Papp had this explosion and then disappeared and went to TRW, and they set him up with a classified program.
Years later, there were also claims that Papp's work ended up inside a TRW project. The story gets murky here, so I wouldn't treat any of this as proof of suppression, but the project was reportedly canceled.
And then one day he came to work and everything was zeroed out of his quote green sheets in his budget, and so he was really pissed about this, and his boss said, go talk to Cy Ramo, who's the R in TRW. And Ramo said, hey, I had to cancel it. I was asked to. I'm pissed about this too.
The engine's ready to run for the next 10 years, I hope. No input, no exhaust, no heat, no cooling system required, very little maintenance, one moving part. There you are. Happy birthday, John. Helium, neon, argon, krypton. I'll buy them raw. I'll treat them over there. When they're ready, we put them in this little bottle, and they're ready to fuel any of my engines anywhere in the world. So you can take this to the moon and fuel the engine, and we've got power up there for the next 10, 20 years. There's enough in here to fuel maybe 10,000 automobiles.
So this is where we're left. We can watch an engine turn, we can watch the RPM change, we can watch dynamometer readings, we can watch those strange reactions hit a piston, and maybe most interesting of all, we can literally watch people carry the batteries away while the engine is still running. But none of that replaces a complete energy balance. Measure every battery, every electrical connection, every stored source of energy, everything going in. Then measure the usable power coming out. If the output really beats the input under independent testing, you've got something extraordinary. And that's the test this story never seems to reach.
Basically the same regardless of your horsepower. So we don't have to run our engine faster than 400 or 500 RPMs. 700 would be a good speed for the engine. And there you are, 716 RPMs and 770.
In which we put 3 cubic centimeters of gases, of inert gases, approximately, whatever centimeters are, 2.5 inches or so. And then there's a top piston that comes in here, and it seals the gases, and this will move up and down.
And that's why I think this story is still so easy to get pulled into. It's not just some guy claiming he invented a miracle machine. There's actual footage. There's hardware. There are patents. There are people who spent years trying to figure out what Papp was doing. And there's just enough here to make you wonder if there was something real buried underneath all the exaggeration. But there's also a pattern. Every time the story gets close to the measurement that would settle it, that measurement isn't there. Maybe there was another source of power that wasn't accounted for. Maybe the tests weren't as controlled as they looked. Maybe Papp found some weird physical effect and completely misunderstood what he'd found. I don't know. And with the evidence that survives, I don't think anybody can honestly say they do. If you noticed something in these tapes that I missed, put the timestamp in the comments. I want to see what you saw. And if this is your kind of video, going back to the original footage and looking for the part everybody skips over, subscribe. I've got more of these coming. Because after all this footage, all these demonstrations, and all these years, one thing is still missing. The test that would have ended the argument.
We're going to drop the RPMs real low. The engine will not shake, throw a rod. Very solid, very smooth running.
What do you say to this?
What do I say to this?
Yeah.
Hubba hubba. It's the beginning of the future right now.